Welcome to Cocktails by the Campfire. I'm Geoff Lewis from Seriously Serious, and I'm joined here with a guest today, none other than
Jason from Overland Adventures Oz.
And it's turning out to be quite a nice evening, isn't it, Jason?
It's a very nice evening.
It is. It is quite idyllic. Some people think you need to rough it when you go camping, but you have to take a few creature comforts with you, don't you, Jason?
You do.
You do, yeah. So what's your page about, Jace? You've got an Instagram page, don't you?
Yes, I do have an Instagram page about van lifing and overlanding in Australia, and bit of travel, bit of beach, bit about the scrub.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So you use conventional vans or four-wheel drive vans, or?
Yeah, I've had a four-wheel drive van which you featured before.
Yes.
On Unique 4x4.
Yep.
And looking to do something different very shortly, so stay tuned to what that might be.
So, any idea what it might be?
I think I might upsize. I'm thinking Mercedes Sprinter.
Mercedes, that's classy. That is classy.
You definitely have to have cocktails by the fire in a Mercedes.
Well, it's just not doing it right, is it? So what's your cocktail of choice by the campfire, Joe?
Well, I do love a G&T.
Oh, okay.
Bit of lime, as you can see.
Yep.
You can't rough it too much when you're out the bush. Still got to have your lime.
Well, the good thing is if the Sprinter's struggling to start, you can always put the gin in the fuel cap, can't you?
Quite possibly.
But the old G&T is pretty interesting, actually, because you've got Indian tonic water in that, don't you?
I do.
And
yes.
is that the tonic water of choice?
I think so.
Because Indian tonic water has slightly more quinine in it than normal tonic water, and that was used to great effect with the East India Company to stop malaria. So there's a fun fact for a quiz night. Anyway, and I've gone for a rusty nail since I drive a Land Rover, but they seldom go rusty because they're sweating power all the time. But a rusty nail is basically a little bit of whiskey and then a little bit of whiskey liqueur on top of it. It's a pretty special drink. I don't normally have this too often, but Jason and I both have the northern and southern hemispheres covered today. Jason's going for the more tropical and I'm going for the more Arctic conditions here. So one of the other little top tips you can do, and actually you had a bit of a chuckle at this, Jace, and I only came across it a few years ago, and I'll just dive into my cocktail. Being a geologist, I can appreciate this, but I've got rocks in my drink. And these are actually really, really good if you're overlanding and using obviously a vehicle where there's a limited payload. Like you've used a HRV in the past?
I have. I've used a little Honda. I've had a couple of Honda all-wheel drive projects that I managed to sleep in quite comfortably.
Oh, wow. And you took them to some pretty extreme places, didn't you?
Oh,
like
yeah.
The HRV,
they go
everywhere.
They go a lot of places.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But you would have had to modify it a bit to do that.
Yeah, just basics, similar to what I did with my van, one size over tyres with all terrains and 20 or 30 mil lift.
So I guess for the lift, you just went to your local ARB dealership and just got a lift kit, hey?
I actually think it was Petters. Most of the work I've done is at Petters, so for those vehicles they sourced King Springs. You can actually get like 20 mil lifted King Springs. The CRV I had sagged because I was always carrying full load, sagged quite a bit in the rear.
Oh.
And I actually got some custom spacers made up to go in the struts on the top of the springs, and that levelled it out.
What did you make the spacers out of?
They were turned up out of steel on a lathe.
I love that. I love that. That's brute force engineering.
And they were machined up with a spring seat and the whole.
Wow.
And the guy who did them even measured up that I wouldn't get spring bind and stuff, made sure that the spacers were the right length, that the spring could still fully compress, etc.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Before the Canning stock group, Damon actually took the front springs out of the Series 3 that's behind us here, and he took them to a spring right. And that's something that is just a dying art now. And it's basically... I've told a lot of people it's like going into a Charles Dickens novel. you go in there and everything's covered in soot and coke and dust. But this guy, he got the springs and he heated them up, and he knew exactly where to hit it on the spring, and it just came back to life. But that level of detail is sort of getting lost a lot now.
I think so.
With that guy who actually made your spaces for you and all the rest. Yeah. One of the things I love about what Jace does, and it's a little bit what we do here too, it's a little bit different from the mainstream, and we were sort of talking about that earlier, weren't we?
Yeah.
Because it's very easy, and I think that's the key thing, isn't it? Ease. To go and get a typical mainstream vehicle, go to a four-wheel drive accessory store and just buy everything straight off the shelf. But if you don't have the money to do that or the resources to do that,
or even if you do have the money, we both know that's not where it's at.
yeah, that's true too. Because
you haven't done it right until you go into a place and they look at your vehicle and they go, "No, we don't do that here."
Did that happen with the Honda?
It did happen with the Honda. I was in getting tyres, and I was telling the guy at the tyre place all about my Honda, and he was just sort of staring out the window, looking at it. Or I don't know if he's even looking at that. and I was telling him about the Honda. He didn't even look back at me, and he's just gone, "Yeah, we don't do that here." And that's when I knew I had the right vehicle.
It is nice to be a little bit different. It's not always easy. I'll give you that now. But
and it's not just for people's opinions. It's just the challenge of doing something different that's unknown.
Well, I think that's very much a driving force for Damon and myself. We've driven right across Australia in a vehicle that I paid $400 for, and I've owned that for I think 12 or 13 years now, and it's still going, so it's pretty remarkable, really. But it's amazing what you can actually do if you put your mind to it, and the key thing is you just got to read up on it, don't you?
And just do your research and see what you can do for that vehicle. Like all the ones I've had's been mostly custom stuff, or if not custom, having to source springs that are similar but a bit longer out of another vehicle and stuff like that.
Well, you actually pointed me towards Petters, I think, last year, because I needed a couple extra leaves to go in the Series 3.
Yep.
And I was able to get some that were pretty close, like the geometry of them, but I actually had to cut them down and then actually drill my own hole to put the centre bolt through, because a lot of vehicles nowadays don't use centre bolts. And once again, I had a very similar experience. I went to a trailer, I think it was a trailer specialist, and I went in there and I asked for just a standard centre bolt, and they said, I don't know what that is. I went, oh gosh, I thought that was pretty standard. So I learnt a lot about that anyway. I learnt that you can use a heavy duty bolt, or a I think probably a grade 5 or grade 8 bolt, and then ground the head down. I think you've done that too,
haven't
haven't
done that
you?
before.
Yeah. Because you started out with Holdens, didn't you, Judge?
Yeah, I had my first car was an EH Holden.
Oh, that's a car.
And I did take it off road, but it wasn't really like I had the mags and it was lowered and all that. And after that, I thought, I need a second car, so I never took that very far off road, just dirt tracks and stuff. And I thought, I want to get out the bush more, and I got a HQ.
Oh.
And I got some just off the shelf raised springs for that.
Yep.
Was that only like?
Because that actually
maybe 1 inch of lift or something, and then I got some. I got some mud terrain tyres in the rear, and just highway pattern on the front. Wow. Oh, and then eventually I got the mud terrain on the front as well, but they weren't. I was a bit limited on the budget, so they weren't anything large. Like you can put a fair sized tyre on a HQ Holden, but I just still had the 14-inch standard rims and whatever the biggest mud terrain was I could fit on there.
Oh, you'd still get plenty of places in that, though.
It went a lot of places. It was actually a very capable car.
What motor did you have in that? The 186?
It was a 173, and I love that motor.
Oh, they are a good motor.
I got 305,000 Ks out of that motor, and then I was out the bush with a mate, and it started a knocking sound. And I'm like, and then we were a bit young and a bit silly, and kept driving, and like, I wonder what it could be. Check the oil. The oil wasn't down, but we found some forestry people, and they had some oil, and we chucked some more oil on, even though it didn't really need it. And then it was getting worse and worse, so I chuck it into neutral down the hills, and then accelerate up the hills just to try and then eventually it just came to a stop, and my parents came and towed us back home. Anyway, we pulled the engine apart to possibly rebuild it, and when we dropped the sump off, I scooped my hand through the sump, and here was half the piston in my hand.
Oh, wow. You wouldn't get that with a motor nowadays. It would have already jumped out the side of the engine block.
But that was a bloody good car.
Yeah.
And it just went a lot of places. Really well balanced car, would climb anything.
Yeah, right.
We went, there was like an old fire track up this mountain in my hometown, and we got a fair way up, me and a mate, and we would have kept going up if I could have got another run up and taken the last climb. But when we went up the last climb, it slid backwards, and the diff housing was wedged on a rock.
Oh, gosh.
So there was just no traction to pull up the hill, and I couldn't come back any further because we were against that rock. And so we walked out of there, and a local with the 4-wheel drive came back with us, and he was going to tow us out, and we're going up the mountain hut, and he's like, oh, so you're up here? And we're like, yeah. And he's like, oh, okay. And we're driving a bit further, and he's like, oh, you sure this is the track? We're like, yeah, keep going. And he's like, how far up here did you get? And he's like, and we're driving. He's like, yeah. So you're sure this is the track? We're like, yeah. And he just couldn't believe we got 3/4 of the way up this track, up to the top of the mountain, and he was in a Hilux, and he's like he pulled us straight out, of course, but he couldn't believe we'd got that 2-wheel drive vehicle all that distance.
It's all about technique, and the other thing is, particularly with the Holdens, that is the gear ratio. The gear ratio is so important, particularly like with these series Land Rovers. Like if you have these tuned right, you can jack up the back of the back wheel and just spin it over and forth and actually start it that way if you haven't got a crank handle. And they will just crawl literally anywhere. But we were chatting about it today because we've both been driving the Series 3, and basically once you get up to 80 k's, that's it. And that's because they do have a really low gear ratio, but off-road, those vehicles like the Holdens, particularly the Kingswoods, they really would just go anywhere.
And that was one of the things too is the balance of the vehicle. So your weight distribution, and this is a principle you can apply even when loading a vehicle. If you load your vehicle right and you've got just a 2-wheel drive, you can go a bloody lot of places in a 2-wheel drive.
Oh, you can. Yeah. We'll just kick this log in the fire.
And the balance of that vehicle, they were just a really well balanced vehicle. So in stock trim, without doing anything, that'd climb a lot of things that other vehicles just wouldn't look at.
Oh yeah. And I spent a bit of time, or went through and did the Plenty Highway, and there was, I think it was a Falcon of a similar era, and they were knocking, obviously there was Indigenous fellows who owned that vehicle naturally, but they were obviously going round this area that was very, very remote, and there was quite a few people in some very, flash 4-wheel drives getting punches left, right and centre. And these guys came in and they filled up with fuel, and then the starter motor actually didn't work, so they actually had no doors on the car. So there was 4 of them, so they all just got 1 pillar each, and it was like a bobsled team. They just ran down this straight, got it rolling, dropped the clutch or chucked it into gear, and then off they went, and it's just amazing what you could do with those vehicles. Yeah. So anyway. Yeah.
It's a different era of vehicles we have now.
It is. And actually, I was reading something interesting the other day. I don't think I told you about that, Jace, but Ron Moon actually did an article for Four Wheel Drive Australia, and I have a look at that magazine on and off now and then. It's not too bad for what it is. It's not as corny as some of the other magazines out there, and not all of them are, but there are some that are a bit tongue-in-cheek. But he touched upon bush mechanics and sort of how it's a bit of a dying art, and one of the things he mentioned was that a lot of people are obviously going out to remote areas in, modern vehicles, a lot newer than what we sort of knock around in, and they're not taking diagnostic tools with them, which I guess, if you're going to a really remote part of the world, like, I don't know, the Canning Stock Route, or Simpson Desert isn't really that remote anymore, is it?
It's probably remote enough, though.
It is, yeah.
Like if you get into trouble there, like even sort of north of here, we could get into trouble, and it mightn't be technically a remote area, but you'd still be pretty buggered if you got into trouble out in the sticks,
That's true. Well, there's a salt lake, you only got to drive 20 metres off the road and you're stuffed. So, that is true. Jason has a fair point. But, but that sort of ingenuity has sort of been lost, I think, a little bit too. And I think one of the things is, a lot of vehicles now, there's not the... people are a little bit scared to sort of delve under the bonnet. There's a lot of wiring and all the rest.
But, well, I remember one trip in this HQ.
Oh, yeah.
And my mate had a KE70 Corolla. Anyway, we did some tracks that... there was a couple of tracks that were pretty full on in terms of climbing, and we both climbed out of those tracks. But anyway, there was a couple of things that happened on this trip. And one particular fond memory... We went out to Malakuta in Victoria, and when we were coming back, we went up through Mount Hotham.
Oh.
So we came along the flats along the river before you climb up to the plains.
Yeah.
Now it was stinking hot, about 38 or 40 degrees.
Yeah.
So anyway, we went for a swim in the river, or creek, but whatever it happened to be. Jumped in the cars, and then we started climbing up. Anyway, the sky ahead was just absolutely black.
Whoa.
Anyway, my window on the HQ had come out of its runner, so I couldn't shut my window.
Oh no!
So we pulled into this stop, and it had all the signs saying how the mountain range was formed and all this sort of stuff as you climbing up to I think the first point you come to is the Dinner Plains, and then after that you got Mount Hotham, and we see this black sky knowing it's going to pour rain. So anyway, we managed to get the door card off.
Yep.
I don't know if I had the tools. We must have had some tools, so we managed to get the window winders off and got the door card off, got the window up.
Yeah.
It was just like a pit stop for a race, We just did boom, got it out, put it up, and drove up to the Dinner Plain. It absolutely poured rain. It was like 40 degrees down at the bottom, and then we got up the top, it was like 18 degrees. It was absolutely freezing, and then when we came back down the other side, it was 40 degrees again. But anyway, another element to this trip was my mate's Corolla, the alternator died.
Oh.
So along the trip it's got dark using the headlights, and even if you're not using the headlights, you're still using electrical power.
Oh, for the ignition system.
But yeah, for your ignition system, your distributor, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So his alternator died. So what we did was, when he got to a point that it was buggered, we'd swap the battery from my HQ.
Yep.
I'd charge up the other one, we'd drive for an hour, switch them back over, and we got home that way. So that was quite an adventurous trip.
Oh, yeah.
And that's those bush mechanics that you're talking about.
Well, that's it. And you didn't even have to travel that far to have an adventure. and that's the thing, too. You don't have to go and do a big lap around Australia to have an adventure, do you?
No, you don't.
You don't. And actually, what Jace was talking about, I've done the exact same thing. And that was actually with my Ford Maverick. A friend of mine, he had a Range Rover, and I think the alternator Oh yes, the sun had set, so Lucas Electric's Prince of Darkness came in. so we actually had to do the same. We actually had to switch the batteries. So he would drive, and this was through a very challenging track. He'd drive so far and get stuck, and then I would stop, pull my battery out, run up to his car, and then take his battery, run back, put it in mine, and then go up, pull him out, and then he'd have another go, and then we'd just keep on going and just keep doing that. And we did that for 7 hours, and that was pretty intense. We finished that track at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's probably the most intense I've ever done, really. But and you know, with the windows too, I had that happen in my second Maverick that I've now got, and it had electric windows, and the windows would go down, but they wouldn't go back up. So I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? So we had the same problem. It's in Tasmania, it's going to rain. How are we going to get around this problem? So we pulled the door cards off, and we had no idea what we were doing. So we pulled the door cards off. We're like, oh, it's electric motor. So we pulled it off the shaft or the spline and then flipped it round and then pressed the button to go down, and the window went back up again. And we got ourselves out of trouble, you know. So it pays to take a workshop manual, or at least study the principles behind it, I guess. That's the key thing to take away from it anyway. Yeah. But we better stoke these coals on this camp oven, because we've got a lamb roast going here, and yeah, hopefully that should be done shortly.
And also, further to note is that my cocktail has run dry.
Oh, it's evaporated. It is WA. That does happen.
It does.
It does. But anyway, thanks for joining us by Cocktails by the Fire, Jace.
Thank you for having me.
And look, if you want to see a good page and you want to follow a true gentleman out there tackling the harsh environment of Australia in style, check out Jason on Overlander Adventures _Oz. Is that right,
Yeah, Overland _Adventures with an A _Oz.
And either way, look in the content section down below of this video, and his Instagram address will be there, and you can follow him from there on with all the adventures and the developments that will happen in the future. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. As I always say, if you want to see more videos like this, please support us on Patreon by clicking on the Patreon icon at the top right hand corner of your screen. And if you want to see more videos also, you can click on the subscribe button down below, and I hope to catch you in our next video.